All right, today we're diving into one of the most incredible, most ingenious acts of defiance from the Second World War. This is a story about how a small town was saved, not with bombs or bullets, but with a microscope and a brilliant, absolutely audacious bluff.
So let's just start with this question. Really think about it. You're facing a massive, overwhelming military force. You've got no weapons, no army, basically no hope of winning a straight up fight. What do? Do you just surrender? Or do you find a completely different way to fight back? Well, our story today is about someone who definitely chose the second option.
To really get just how clever this whole thing was, we've got to go back in time to one of the darkest moments in modern history, Nazi-occupied Poland during World War II. Our story takes place in the city of Rozwadów, and for the people living there, both Polish and Jewish residents, they were under the constant, terrifying shadow of the Nazi war machine. For them, the situation looked completely and utterly hopeless.
And this really puts it into perspective. On one side, you have the German army, with all its power, its weapons, its manpower, and on the other, unarmed civilians. It was a totally lopsided situation, with what looked like no path to survival. But when you're facing impossible odds, sometimes the most incredible ideas are born. A local doctor came up with a plan, a way to fight back without firing a single shot. So let's meet our hero. This is Eugene Lazowski. Now, he wasn't a general or a soldier in the typical sense. He was a Polish military doctor. And his weapon of choice, well, it wasn't a gun. It was his deep, deep knowledge of medicine and disease. Okay, so here is the crucial piece of the puzzle, the scientific loophole that Lazowski and his friend found. There was this test for typhus, a disease the Germans were absolutely terrified of. But the test had a weird little quirk. It would also show a positive result if it came into contact with a totally harmless bacteria called Proteus OX19. So you could make someone test positive for typhus without them being even slightly sick. And in that tiny detail, Lazowski saw a massive opportunity. And this was the four-step plan he came up with. First, get his hands on a dead strain of that harmless bacteria. Second, secretly inject the non-Jewish residents of Rozwadów and the nearby villages. And there's a really chilling reason for this distinction. The Germans would execute any Jewish person who tested positive for typhus. This was a plan to save everybody. Third, this would trigger a huge wave of false positive results. And the final brilliant move, send those blood samples to the German labs and let them think a massive epidemic was tearing through the area. Lazowski had laid the perfect trap. He literally created a phantom epidemic, a public health crisis that only existed on paper and inside those little glass blood vials. The bait was set. And the Germans, they took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. See, their fear of typhus was very, very real. Historically, they knew it was a disease that could absolutely decimate armies. So when they saw what looked like a rapidly spreading epidemic, their first reaction wasn't to invade. It was to stay the heck away. And the plan worked. Unbelievably fast. In just a matter of months, from starting those secret injections, the German authorities officially declared the entire area a quarantine zone. This was the checkmate. Yes, the residents of Rozwadów weren't allowed to leave, but crucially, Nazi soldiers were forbidden to enter. Lazowski had basically weaponized their own bureaucracy and their own fears against them, building an invisible wall around the entire city. And the results of this phantom epidemic? Get this. An estimated 8,000 people, men, women, and children, both Polish and Jewish, were saved from being deported to concentration camps and facing almost certain death. 8,000 lives saved by a fake disease. Just think about that. And that brings us to the legacy of this incredible act of resistance. It's a story that was almost lost. The quiet, world-changing achievement of a true, unsung hero. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? While the rest of the world was fighting with bombs and tanks, Dr. Lazowski fought back with his mind. He drove out an army without firing a single shot. It's one of those stories that sounds almost made up. It was an act of immense courage. He was risking his own life to protect his community. He literally weaponized science to pull off what has to be one of the most brilliant and, frankly, one of the most hilarious military tactics in all of history. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. Dr. Lazovsky's story is proof that heroism comes in all shapes and sizes. It doesn't always happen on a battlefield. Sometimes it's about using what you know, your creativity, your courage, to make a difference. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other incredible stories, what other unsung heroes has history just forgotten?